Welcome to the show, everybody. Welcome, Matthew Vlos.
Hi there.
How are you?
I'm doing great. Excited to jump into some Senate bills.
Yeah, I feel like I'm yelling because I'm so excited about this episode. So, anyone tuning in, you probably saw the name of the episode, but we're going to be talking about Senate Bill 3814 out of New Jersey, which is their dog trainer licensure bill. There's a lot to this. We're going to give you kind of a high level overview. We're going to get into a lot of nitty gritty, both from a legal standpoint and then also just from a business standpoint, how this would actually work. So we'll try to get through it quickly today, but there's a lot to cover here.
So a lot of people don't know that you have a bit of a background in law. So this is really sort of in your ballpark, right? So do you want to just tell people about that a little bit first?
Sure. So yeah, it is a great time to do a disclosure that I am a lawyer, but nothing I say should be considered legal advice. And I'm married, and nothing I say should be considered marital advice either. I'm a parent. Definitely don't take my parenting advice. So I have a law degree from Northwestern. I practiced law for a short period of time. Enjoyed it, but dog training is just something I've always enjoyed more. But when things like this come up, I love to read them, look into them, and I guess for lack of a better phrase, put my lawyer hat on and look at how the language will actually work, because one word can make a massive difference. And we're going to jump into that, as we break down this law today. And there are some things in there that whether you agree with the law or not, that are written they're ambiguous enough that this would be a nightmare if this was passed. So let's do a brief overview. So this was introduced by Senator Van Gopal. Hopefully I'm saying his name right, in New Jersey. He's not in the U.S. Senate. This is the New Jersey Senate. It would establish a dog training licensing board to regulate trainers. Trainers would have to take an exam to become a dog trainer. They'd have to meet education and experience requirements. It bans aversive training methods in favor of evidence-based, science-based dog training. I gotta trust the science, of course. You take an exam, you pay a fee for the exam. It says they might administer it probably twice a year. And then, for new dog trainers to try to become a dog trainer. And they do have a carve out that this does not apply to people who train police dogs. I don't find that to be super important. It was just interesting.
Or military dogs,
Or
police or
military, yeah. You want to train dogs, you want to train a golden doodle to sit, you need this. But you want to train a dog to bite criminals, and just do your thing, buddy. Okay. So now it's important to know we're filming this on a Tuesday. Yesterday, this was heard in the New Jersey Senate, and it was put on hold, which is absolutely great news. But keep in mind that this was put on hold. It could easily be taken up again soon, and in New Jersey, but also this will be tried in other states. Not this exact law, but they'll have a version of it. So this is not done. So if you reached out, if you were part of the crew that helped speak out yesterday and keep this from happening, good for you. But we all know this is not done, so we have to keep an eye on all of this stuff.
So as somebody who's not as familiar with how bills become law and all that kind of stuff, I guess help me out a little bit here. So on hold, that means that this was a bill that was proposed. It was supposed to be voted on, but they didn't vote, but they might vote in the future. Is that where we're at?
That's my understanding. Now, I would love to see a transcript of what was said yesterday. I didn't see one that had been released yet, so I don't know what exactly was said. All I know is it was put on hold, so it could easily be sent to a vote. And we'll talk later on. There was also, I think they call it the General Assembly, is their version of like the House of Representatives. They have the Senate and then the lower house as well. Their General Assembly had a very similar bill to this that was introduced last year. So for all we know, the General Assembly will take it up in a few months. And, their bill is very similar, slightly different, which we'll talk about. And if it passed the General Assembly, then that bill would get sent to the New Jersey Senate. And in theory, they could just pass that bill and send it to the governor. So this is good that it wasn't voted on or passed yesterday, but it's definitely not conclusive. It's no way is this done.
It sounds like you mentioned this already, but you said how there were people who were there yesterday to speak out against it. It sounds like it was a really long line of people. So again, I didn't see a transcript or anything, but from what I can tell, it seems like there were a good amount of people there to speak out against it. It said one of the articles I read said there was a line of people there to speak up against it. So
That's awesome. I mean, so I've had people reaching out to me asking about this law, and someone sent me a link to Yahoo News, which, like, that was news to me. I didn't even know Yahoo News was a thing anymore, and Yahoo was talking about this. So that's pretty interesting that this has made national news, right? Where it's not just in the dog training world. The person who sent me the link to Yahoo was obviously over the age of 70 because they're using Yahoo News, and not in the dog training world. They just saw it. So pretty interesting that this has become such a news story. So, this law, we're going to get into the nitty gritty, but just so you know, this is a big deal. The way this law is written, and this will make sense later on as I get into it, this would put every single balanced trainer in New Jersey out of business. It would criminalize what you do, and you would be 100% out of business. And this would drastically increase the cost of dog training in New Jersey. It would also get rid of a lot of kennel clubs and agility classes and CGC testing, which we'll get into. So this is not a small thing like, oh, who cares? Take a quick test and whatever, $50 or something. There's a lot to this, which we're going to jump into. This would be a really big deal. So, you look like you've got something to say, Vlos.
When I first saw this, or at least when I first saw the headline of the bill, right, I thought that's not the biggest deal. There's a ton of people out there who claim to be dog trainers, right? And I mean, it's everybody from basically anyone who volunteers at a humane society generally will say they're a dog trainer, which it's nothing really against them, but you also end up with a lot of really bad advice from people who are claiming to be dog trainers without a lot of experience. So my first thought when I saw it was maybe this isn't such a big deal. Maybe it will help ensure that the people who are giving people advice for dog training actually have a background in it. But then once you get into the way the bill's actually written, like you said, it goes so much further than just licensing dog trainers. So even if you just think every dog trainer should be licensed, there's a lot more in this bill that makes it a more complicated issue.
For sure. And of course, if you phrase it as, don't you think we should get rid of bad dog trainers? Yeah, who's opposed to that? Let's get rid of the bad operators and the shady people, and for sure. I mean, that seems great. And then as you get into it, of course, you realize all the problems. So, I mentioned kennel clubs a minute ago. The AKC was one of the groups that was highly opposed to this. The IACP was as well, in working together to, get people moving and talking about this, and, writing, especially people in New Jersey doing business there, writing the senator and telling him this is an issue. Full disclosure here, I'm on the board of directors of the IACP. My opinions here, though, are certainly my opinions, not the opinions of the group. The IACP is opposed to this potential law, but my views are 100% my own. So just take that how you will, but just know this is just my opinion here. Just consider me a dude who likes talking about dogs and is very, very opinionated on this topic.
Yeah, I think we should go a little bit further with full disclosure and say, neither one of us is New Jersey residents, right? So you might be asking yourself, does this affect you at all? Why are you bothering to talk about it? I think some of the reasons that you already pointed out are good reasons for us to be talking about it just in general. If this is happening in New Jersey, it could be happening in any state. So I think it's important to have the conversation, period. But furthermore, our business does operate in New Jersey. So we have a trainer that's in another state adjacent to New Jersey, and we have clients that are inside New Jersey. So the rules that are laid out in this law would directly impact us. So I think it's a really important thing for us to talk about and understand.
That's a good point. Okay, nitty gritty time. We've got a lot to go through. So
yeah, one thing I wanted to start as we're jumping into the nitty gritty is just, why do you think this bill was introduced at this time? I always wonder this type of thing, what causes this stuff to come up? Was this an incident that happened with between a dog and a trainer? Or is this just because a lobbyist group saw an opportunity? What do you think's going on here?
So I have very strong views in general of why these laws are being pushed and who's behind it. So first off, I would say I don't have any animosity to the senator that put this bill forward. Being a senator or a representative, you have like people bringing ideas to you all the time and pushing bills. And you look at it and on its face, you're like, yeah, I think people will like this, right? Like, who doesn't want to get rid of like mean dog trainers? Like, that's a no brainer. And like, I could see why they would see that. I'm like, yeah, let's move forward with this. To his credit, when people spoke out, he listened. So kudos to him. So I think that's great. I think that the driving force behind all of these bills is there's a lot of people who I think are being used. So people who care about dogs, care about pets, and really want pets to have the best life. I think many of them are being used by forces behind the scenes, PETA and others, that are opposed to dogs being pets. There are a lot of people on the record saying dogs should not be pets. And this might sound kind of crazy, but what better way to have dogs not be pets anymore than to make it a nightmare to own a dog? In some areas, they're trying to ban cages. Who's going to want to own a dog if you can't, crate them for their safety? And if they're pulling on leash and lunging and you can't like give a little tug back on the leash to stop them from lunging, who wants to own a dog like that? So I really do think there's a lot of really good, nice people that are involved in this legislation that are being used where the money and is coming from a lot of times groups with bad intentions. And they say it's animal welfare, but animal welfare in their mind means getting rid of pets and dogs would live in the wild. So I think there's lots and lots of good people involved here and then some very dark things happening in the background as well.
Interesting. And you mentioned crates there. I find that interesting because there's some stuff in the law that talks about keeping dogs in sort of confined spaces as well, or sort of banning that. And I don't think we had anything in our agenda to talk about that. So that might be something they were looking to do through this as well, sort of like as an additional point in the bill that doesn't really get much attention.
Okay, well, let's talk. I think this point we can do pretty quickly. There'd be a board that would oversee dog trainers, and the makeup of the board is specified in the act, but there'd be a group of people that would oversee, all dog trainers in the state, decide what's on the test, and do the examination. Super important is let's talk about some of the actual language. So the bill states that no aversive methods may be used in dog training. As a non-dog trainer, you hear that, and you're like, that seems fair. Like aversive sounds bad, so why would you want to use aversive methods? And then they define aversive methods, and this is really important. Anytime you're looking at a bill or a law, the place you start is the definitions because that tells you everything. If you don't, they'll use a word and act like it's a regular word, but they've got their own definition. So aversive training is described as the use of practices, devices, or tools employed by a dog trainer that deliberately cause pain, injury, or distress. So on its face, it seems pretty good. Doesn't seem that ridiculous. Like who wants to hurt a dog? A couple big issues. So let's just think about some of those words. The one I key in on is distress. So I would say like distress is not defined, just aversive training methods. So what is distress? Like is whining a sign of distress? Is a dog slicking his ears back a sign of distress? I would argue yes. It's mild distress, but it's distress. So there right away is a problem, right? This board could do whatever they feel like, and they could be like, well, that dog is clearly distressed right there. So now you've used aversive training methods. On top of that, they use the word deliberately, and I think that's a little poorly written. In my opinion, it should be something more like intention. So first of all, I don't think this law should exist at all. But if it did, and you wanted to make it not so broad, maybe saying something like using tools with the intention of causing pain or injury. So there, we get rid of the word distress. Like if you're trying to cause injury, like that's a bad thing. So I could see that make a lot more sense than deliberately doing something that could cause distress. So to me, pretty much anything could be categorized as an aversive method here. And I'm going to give you an example. So purely positive trainers will, and for those of you who are listening who aren't trainers, purely positive just means kind of what it sounds like, no corrections whatsoever. And they'll say no punishment whatsoever. what they'll often do is what's called negative punishment. They'll take something away to punish the dog to make a behavior less likely to happen. So what they might do is hold it, like have a treat in their hand. A dog jumps on them for the treat, and they take the treat away and put it in their pocket. So I would look at that. That treat is a tool. They're using it for both positive reinforcement and negative punishment. So it's for sure a training tool. And they then took that treat away and used it in a way that I would say is causing that dog distress. If that dog really wants the treat and they're frustrated or sad they're not getting it, that dog is distressed. So to me, you just violated this law by holding a treat above the dog's head and you could hear that and say, well, that sounds excessive. The way the law is written, unless it was really, or I keep saying law, the way the bill is written, that's a fair argument that would be causing distress, and it's left up to this board. So this board of random people could determine, yeah, no, that's not good. And what, are you a criminal now for doing that? I mean, to me, it's absolutely insane.
Yeah, and I think you had said that you don't think it's all that important who makes up the board. I think it is somewhat. They had 9 members on the board, and 4 of them are supposed to be dog trainers, and they're only dog trainers that have passed the least intrusive, minimally averse training program and agreed to those standards. So right there are people who are going to go with this training methodology and this training methodology only. So it really is limiting how dogs can be trained right off the bat.
I think that's a very good point. And the board would have a lot of power. And in my opinion, too much power for sure.
Yeah, I think it jumps into something else that I saw in there that I thought was really poorly written, was the talk about good professional moral character. And then they sort of try and define what that is. But, again, I'm not a legal person, but to me, the definition was basically anyone that they deem not fit. It talks about criminal record to some extent and talks about rehabilitation of that person. But outside of that, from what I can see, it just sort of gives them the broad ability to paint anyone as not a good professional or of not good professional moral character, which just seems like they could limit anyone from getting a license for any reason.
It's a good point. Okay, so as a lawyer, we often will make arguments, the slippery slope argument, which is basically what I was getting to with the treat example I just gave, that you just look at it and you're like, well, they make this decision, then they make this one, and they make this one, and it's a slippery slope. And all of a sudden you're to a point where it's so restrictive, no one can even train dogs anymore. Another thing to think about is what other laws out there are similar to this, and let's see how they're treated. So I did some research, and something interesting is in New Jersey, courts have determined that spanking your child for discipline is fine. There's no issue there. It only becomes an issue if I think the exact words are, if you're inflicting unnecessarily severe corporal punishment, which is pretty extreme, or unnecessary pain and suffering. And the tests they use are there bruises? Are there injuries to the child after you spank them? So just think about that for a second. In the state of New Jersey, you can spank your child as much as you want, as long as you don't bruise them. But you couldn't give a tug on a cloth collar straight back if your dog is lunging for a train or a motorcycle and could get hit and killed. Like,
crazy.
That's nuts.
Just sounds crazy.
It's absolutely nuts. And spanking's an extreme example. I mean, I have 3 kids. I don't spank my kids. And I don't judge people that do. But it's just not what we do. But we use aversives with our children, and you might hear them and be like, "Oh my gosh!" We're not talking about waterboarding or something, right? Aversives, I'll give you a couple examples. One would be if our kids, if one of them yells at their mother, that's a big deal. They're going to get a stern talking to from me, and something they want is going to go away for a period of time, right? That's an aversive. That's a punishment. If they, are arguing and don't listen, the last one to stop arguing is going to go sit in their room for a while. That's an aversive. And the thing people need to think about, and especially non-dog trainers, is dogs don't learn like that. So for a kid, you can say, hey, dude, don't yell at your mother. If you raise your voice one more time, you're not going to get this for a week. And they can be like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, I don't want to do that. That would suck. So they might change their behavior, right? And the next time they raise their voice, they're like, oh, I don't want to lose whatever for a week. So they change their behavior ahead of time. Dogs don't think like that. They cannot, they like a dog, like let's say they jumped on the counter and stole food. What are you going to do? Say like, hey, you're not getting dinner later, buddy, or you're getting a smaller dinner, or I was going to give you a raw egg on your dinner, which you love, but today you don't get it. Like they don't think that way. It's not an effective way to train a dog. Imagine a dog jumping over the fence and they run to, even if they're nice, to play with the neighbor dog, but they could get hit by a car and killed. Like, what are you going to do? Bring them in and be like, hey, you're not getting your antler tonight. So, and you're not sleeping in bed with me. So what do you think about that? The dog's going to have no idea what those punishments are for. Dogs need some sort of correction in the moment if they've done something wrong to understand what's happening.
Yep. They definitely need something they can understand.
And then just another thought about aversives. There are so many aversives in human life. Speeding tickets, that's an aversive. You go too fast, you get a ticket. Tickets aren't fun. They make you not want to do it. Like, that's an aversive. Jail, getting fired. I mean, all these different things are aversives. Like, that's how people are kept in line. So think about this. In New Jersey, if this was passed, it would be, we can use aversives with humans. We can spank children. We can punish adults with aversives, but we cannot punish dogs. That is asinine. It just makes no sense as you really kind of break it down. And just want you to think, a quick tug on the leash and telling them no for trying to chase a motorcycle would now be a problem under this. And I think saying it'd be criminal is a little bit far, but subject to fines, and it could be criminal at some point potentially. So there's a lot of worries. So I guess we want to talk through, there's so many potential issues. One is, just to be clear, if this was passed, prong collars, e-collars, banned in New Jersey, no question. Now, the things themselves wouldn't be banned. You could have one in your house to look at, but you couldn't use it on a dog. So that would be banned for trainers to use those. What's interesting is non-trainers could use them. So you could use it on your own dog. So a trainer could be like, hey, you should, if you want to stop that pulling, you should use a prong, but I can't hold the leash. You'll have to do it. That's kind of odd. This would turn into, I would think, banning any tugging on a leash, no matter what, no matter how gentle. It would be an issue. I think this would certainly, think about purely positive trainers. They send a lot of clients to us when there's aggression cases, because purely positive doesn't work for most real aggression cases. What's going to happen to those dogs? As a dog trainer, we know the answer. They're going to get the needle, right? Those dogs are going to get euthanized. The purely positive can't fix many of these issues. And now you're unable, if this was passed, you'd be unable to use any other tools. So any dog that shows aggression I shouldn't say any dog that shows aggression. Any actually aggressive dog, instead of getting fixed, is more likely just to get euthanized.
Yeah, and you're going to have customers with dogs like that who are looking for alternatives, potentially having to go across state lines to get their dog training, which just seems weird and unnecessary.
For sure. Dog training costs will go up. To me, there's no question about that. More regulation means higher costs, right? In any industry, that's just what happens. There's a bigger barrier to entry. It's harder to become a dog trainer. There's fees you need to pay. We don't know how much they are. But on top of that, most dog trainers are part-time and they don't make very much money. And the majority of dog trainers have another job and they're training dogs on the side. They're going to be effectively shut down, regardless of the methods they're using. So the supply is going to go way down, especially the supply on the low end of the pricing scale. So what this is going to do, larger operators, if this, were to pass, you'd have your bigger training companies that would, pay it and it'd be fine. It's not going to be that much money for them. But your smaller operators are gone. And the AKC was pretty clear about this. You look at, confirmation classes, agility classes, CGC classes. Most of these, or many of these, are taught by people that are experts, but they're not a full-time trainer. Go to some of these places. The agility trainer often is not an agility trainer 60 hours a week. They work as an accountant. And on Tuesday nights, they teach agility because they've done it with their own dogs for a year and they love it. for years. And so they're like most likely done. They're just going to have to wash their hands of it and no longer be a trainer. So like, this is not a good thing overall for the industry and for customers. Prices will 100% go up.
Yeah, and the bill doesn't get into what the cost of the license would be. It's going to leave it up to the board to determine that. So this goes back to the board having just a ton of power, right? They're going to basically be setting the cost of the license. They're going to be setting the requirements for the license, which is going to also determine costs. So, what courses does the person have to pay for in order to be able to take the test, et cetera. It gives them a lot of power. And what it almost makes me feel like, and I know this is really an extreme example, it's like the cabbie licenses back in New York City, right? And that's something that's sort of going away at this point with Uber and rideshare getting rid of that. But that was a huge deal where there was all sorts of corruption and people were paying millions of dollars to get a license to be able to be a cabbie inside the city of New York. And it kept a lot of smaller operators, as you said, from being able to operate, right? Because they couldn't get in, they couldn't get a foothold, they couldn't afford it. So this would really change the landscape of a lot of things just based off of the cost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then besides just cost, like you said, just barrier to entry and favoritism, cronyism, like, who knows? Another example, like I was just thinking through times this could come up, as this is written, if you have your 16, and just for the record, a lot of our clients do this. So this is not like some weird made up example. Let's say you have a dog with some behavioral issues and you work a lot, so you need help and you don't want to pay your trainer to come by every single time, right? Like you're at work and you need someone to watch your dog. You might pay your 16-year-old neighbor to come over and take the dog out during the day and maybe practice their obedience or their agility. Or very often we train with people like that. So we'll come like work with the person's neighbor kid to show them how to heel the dog properly so it's not lunging at other dogs or whatever. And then that person comes by, 5 times a week while the client's at work. Well, as this is written, there's a very good chance that the 16-year-old has just violated this. First of all, it says you have to be 18 to be a dog trainer. And on top of that, you have to, you have to become a dog trainer anytime you're training dogs for a fee. I would say there's a good argument that you're training dogs for a fee. You're taking a fee to then walk the dog and do some training with them. So that
I think the line gets really blurry, right?
Yeah.
So you paid somebody to come walk your dog or to house sit for your dog, right? But if they try and get the dog to walk better while they're walking it, are they training the dog at this point? They've definitely accepted money, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if they do anything to make the dog walk better, to me, that means they're training that dog at the end of the day. They're trying to change its behavior. Same thing if you have a sitter in the house and the dog steals food off the counter and they stop it. Are they training the dog at that point, or are they not
lock
training
them up.
the dog?
Right? I would put that sitter in prison. Boom.
I just think the line gets so blurry. If anyone's accepting money from a groomer to a house sitter to a dog walker, any of those people could, in theory, be considered training the dog for a fee.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. In the times that these laws are like something like this, that's usually so restrictive, are times where it's a really big deal if you're doing this without a license. So like being a doctor, if you're just like sometimes giving people medical advice and giving them exams and you're not a real doctor, that's a big deal, right? Even if you do it once or twice. Same with being a lawyer, right? Like if you're not licensed, that's a big problem to be giving legal advice. Dog trainers are not doctors or lawyers. And actually, I was going to talk about this later. There's some sentence in there about the Hippocratic Oath. Give me a break. I encourage everyone to read it. There's a whole section about the language is just weird. Like, do no harm. Like, yes, I agree. We shouldn't do harm, obviously, but we're not doctors. Like, to have the Hippocratic Oath applying to dog trainers to me is just bizarre. But, this bill doesn't spend much time talking about penalties. The other bill, the one that was introduced into the General Assembly, did. It had fines of up to $3,000 for violating it. And if you don't get a license, in my opinion, there's an argument that you'd be committing fraud. You'd be fraudulently operating your business, which could open you up to criminal charges. So I don't think the 16-year-old would get criminal charges who's walking your dog. I'm not that extreme on this, but a dog trainer who's like, I don't know if my methods would qualify. I'm willing to give a tug back if the dog's pulling. In theory, there could be criminal charges against them, which to me is nuts. Which I guess this is a good time to talk about something. There are animal cruelty laws in New Jersey, and maybe we should have opened with this. Animal cruelty laws are good. Those are a good thing. If someone's being cruel, they should get in trouble for being cruel. Those laws apply to both dog trainers and dog owners. And to me, they're enough. It's already illegal to be cruel to a dog. And it's already illegal to hurt a dog and to intentionally, cause pain. So, and it should be illegal for a trainer or an owner to hurt a dog. This is just written to trainers. So to me, it's a little bit bizarre. But just something to think about. Anyone listening who's kind of seen the contrary side of it, you're like, hey, I've seen some really bad dog trainers. What if they're hurting dogs? Well, there's already something that makes that illegal. This law is not needed to, make people unallowed to hurt dogs purposely. The other bill, the one that was introduced into the assembly, also had an exception for out-of-state trainers, like a de minimis exception. Like if you don't train a bunch or there for a couple days, whatever, that would be exempted. This doesn't have that, which means, in my opinion, workshops in New Jersey would be done. Like you would never have dog training conferences there. You wouldn't have dog trainers that come in to do a conference or like a workshop where you bring your dog and they'll work with it and teach you about your dogs. Like who would come in from out of state if they're going to have to somehow get a license for the day? It's just not doable. Other things I looked into are like who else needs a license or doesn't need a license in New Jersey. So groomers don't need a license. Breeders don't need a license. I did a little research. It would be easier to be a general contractor and to build a house than it would be to become a dog trainer in New Jersey.
That's crazy.
That's nuts. Like you could just become it'd be easier to be a GC and build a house, which think of the liability there and the amount of skill that takes. Another one I thought was interesting is nannies don't need a license. So we've already talked about spanking. So let's think about that for a second. You can hire an unlicensed nanny who's allowed to spank your children. That's okay. That's perfectly legal in New Jersey. So you hire an unlicensed random person to be a nanny who can spank your children as long as they don't cause unnecessary suffering and bruises. But you can't hire your neighbor kid to help out with kind of dog training and exercise while you're at work.
Crazy.
So the kid that's walking your dog that might give a tug on the leash, that's too far. That's maybe cruel. It's definitely aversive. He needs a dog training license, but nannies that can raise your children don't. That's pretty odd result of the law to me.
For sure.
So anything else you think we should expand on, Matt? There's so much here we could talk about. We've covered the big points that I want people to be aware of, and hopefully everyone listening knows that this law, the more you read into it, the more worrisome. Or I keep saying law. Thankfully, it's not a law. This bill, the more you read into it, the more worrisome it becomes.
I think we covered the majority of it. I don't think we need to dive further into any one specific part. I think it's just important that everybody, keeps an eye on this and sees where it goes. Don't lose sight of it because it's a really important issue and it could impact all of us.
Yeah, 100%. And this was put on hold because of people reaching out and saying and showing up, in person, but there were petitions signed. That goes a long way because like I said earlier, I don't think anything negative about this senator. I don't know the person at all. And I don't think they had bad intentions in the slightest from everything I've heard. And they don't know all this stuff because they're not in the industry. So if no one reaches out, they only know the people that came to them and said, you should pass, you should make this into a law. So you have to reach out. So I would say everyone listening, know that this is not done, even in New Jersey, and it's certainly not done nationwide. Keep an eye on this stuff. We're going to start highlighting a lot more of these in the podcast to make you aware. So this will be a place to turn to if you're interested. And anything you do helps. Being willing to sign a petition is huge. If it's in your state, reaching out to whoever introduced the bill would be great. If it's something you can do and you could show up and speak, even better. But anything you can do, even if it's just signing a petition, sharing it on Facebook and any balance training groups, or talking to other trainers about it, every little step goes a long way to prevent something like this from passing.
Definitely.
Awesome. Well, that's all I've got. If anyone has questions or want us to expand on something, or even if you want to push back and say, hey, I disagree, leave a comment and we could easily do a follow-up episode if people want us to. But this is a topic I'm pretty passionate about, so happy to respond to comments anytime.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for listening.
All right. Have a good day.